Functional Training Workshop, Module Exercises Part 2. So the objectives of this module are to show the correct technique for basic exercises using medicine balls, sandbags and vipers, and to gain an understanding of how to include these functional training exercises within a resistance training program for individuals or small groups. After observation of this presentation, you should then complete the guided practice for this module, details of which are on the Learner Management System. So we'll start off with medicine balls. Going to look at the squat, push, press, slams, overhead rotations, lunge and rotate, lunge and overhead reach, and the seated rotation slams. In relation to application, medicine ball drills are suitable for dynamic drills, multi-planar exercises, and for throwing and catching drills. So here we have the medicine ball squat, push, press. This is a combination squat and vertical upwards press movement pattern. So we're going to squat all the way down, and then as we come up on the ascent, you're then going to use that momentum to help press the medicine ball overhead to full extension. This differs from a push press, in which we only do a partial squat. With a squat push press, you do want to try to squat down through a full range of motion. So if you can do a full squat, then you should do for this particular drill. It's very good at looking or teaching the body to kind of integrate multiple movement patterns together, and if you want to use it for kind of effectively a metabolic goal, it's very good for helping to get the heart rate and metabolism elevated for that particular type of session. Now, medicine ball slams, so this is part of the smash movement pattern, or a movement that's involved in the smash movement pattern. So you're going to lift the medicine ball overhead, and then it's a flexion movement to accelerate the medicine ball downwards towards the ground. Now you really only want to use this with a slam medicine ball, or a non-bouncing medicine ball. Avoid using this with a bouncing medicine ball, otherwise it can kind of come up and hit you in the face or in the groin, and there are lots of videos on YouTube that will show you that. So we want to try to avoid using a bouncing medicine ball with this. It has to be a deadened ball. So it's going to be working the anterior core and also the hip flexors, and even with the upper body, a little bit of lats being used in there as well. Now the next exercise is overhead rotations, or thigh-to-thigh rotations. So what we do here, do a little squat down. Medicine ball starts on the kind of lateral side of one thigh, and you're going to come up and over in an arc. It is part of the rotation movement pattern. So you're going to be working the lateral core in particular, as well as the kind of shoulders are going to be worked with this one. So yeah, tiny mini kind of squat movement pattern, but we don't really kind of classify it as a squat exercise. Predominantly it's all about the rotation movement pattern. The next exercise we have here is the lunge and rotate. So a lot of people do this and they kind of break it down and kind of stagger each one. We prefer to do it kind of as an integrated thing. So as you lunge, immediately you start to kind of rotate towards that side. So as you terminate the kind of lunge part, you're also kind of terminating and finishing the rotation pattern. The reason we do it this way rather than lunge and then rotating is that if we do it concurrently at the same time, then you're going to get much greater activation of the muscle spindles of the lateral core, which is what we're trying to hit here, and those muscles are going to fire up to a much greater degree. So this is a combination rotation pattern, and then the lunge is part of the squat movement pattern as well. Now similar but different, we then have the lunge and overhead reach. So this isn't working the rotation pattern now, this is going to be hitting the smash pattern muscles. So as we lunge forward, this time we're going to reach the medicine ball up and overhead in an arc. And as we terminate the lunge, we should be reaching that kind of maximum point with the medicine ball above the head. So this is going to be working in particular the anterior core. So as we reach overhead, those anterior core muscles are trying to decelerate the medicine ball, and so the spinal flexors, the anterior core muscles, really going to get worked and focused with this particular exercise. You don't want to go too far with it, so we're focused on reaching upwards rather than reaching backwards. And the last drill we show you here is our seated rotation slams. So the slams, again, we're going to be throwing them against the ground, but it's more of a rotation pattern rather than the kind of smash pattern. So from a seated position, you're going to lift the medicine ball above the head and then going to slam it down onto the floor, again to one side. And just as we did with the standing slams, you want to use a deadened ball for this, or a slam ball. You don't want to use a bouncing medicine ball for this type of drill. So this is going to be working the core rotators. It's part of the rotation movement pattern. And again, it's a tough drill if you're doing that for 20, 30, 40 seconds. So the sandbag drills that we'll show you now include power cleans, which is a combination lift and pull movement, figure of 8 swings, which is a rotation movement, high pulls, which is a pull pattern, in particular vertical pull upwards. We're going to do a diagonal lift onto the shoulder, alternating, which is a lift pattern movement, the lunge and rotate crunch, squat and rotation movements, shoulder to shoulder press, which is the press pattern, and then the last one we'll show you is a split stance good morning, which is another. Again, for application and uses, sandbags can be used as an alternative to a barbell, medicine ball, and even a Viper for lower body, upper body, core, or even whole body drills. Because of the instability of the contents, what we mean by that is that the sand shifts as the bag is moved, it's going to stimulate the stabilizers of the core, the hip, or the shoulder, depending on what exercise you're doing, more so than other modes of more stable training, such as a barbell. So for example, if you're doing a squat with a sandbag, then the weight is going to, or the sand is going to shift a little bit more so than if you're doing exactly the same exercise with a more stable bar on your back. Sandbags also provide a greater variety of positions than more traditional freeweight equipment like barbells, etc. The fact that we can kind of place them in a lot more different positions. So sandbag power cleans. Going to take hold of the two neutral handles. You can either lift it from the thighs or the knees or from the ground, and it's a combination lift, so it's a lot of hip movement, and then it's upward pull, and then as the bag is coming upwards, kind of towards the chest, what you do is you roll the hands underneath and catch it in this partial front squat position. And that's what the kind of power clean part of it means, is we're only catching it in a partial squat position. Again, it's very good for getting the bag into the position to do front squats, to do overhead presses, or just as a metabolic exercise to get the heart rate up. Now the figure of 8 swings is a rotation movement pattern. It's a continuous exercise. So again, very good for getting the heart rate elevated. So in a parallel stance, take hold of the sandbag, 2 hands, and effectively you're swinging it in front of the body in this figure of 8 pattern. So swing it down by the hips, lift it up, and then come across the body diagonally to the opposite hip, lift it back up again to the shoulders, and then again down and across the body in a diagonal pattern. And you can continue this again 10, 20, 30, 40 seconds at a time. We can adopt different stance positions, kneeling, split kneeling, etc. if you are looking for some. Then we have high pulls, single hand, so we're going to take hold of the single handle, or the central handle, and from the ground you're going to do a lift and upward pull pattern movement, and then all we do is swap hands with each repetition. So we're pulling upwards, kind of like an upright row, but we're integrating it with the lift pattern as well, so you're going to be using the hips as well to help generate force on the way up. Now the lift to the shoulder, this is a great alternative to a standard kind of lift pattern movement. So you're going to take hold of the sandbag, kind of either side, you're almost going to stood astride it, and then you can use the hips to forcefully kind of extend the hips in order to generate the force to lift it up onto one shoulder. Now from there we could do squats with the sandbag on one shoulder. In this case we're just getting the bag up onto the shoulder, placing it back down onto the ground, and then alternating sides with each repetition. Now the lunge with rotate crunch, so we saw a kind of lunge with rotation with a medicine ball. This is a variation, so we're actually going to pop it onto the back like a back squat position. You're going to do your standard lunge, and you're going to rotate, but this time we're actually going to kind of drop the shoulder or the elbow towards that opposite knee. So you're actually getting a combination of squat with the lunge, rotation, but also a little bit of a kind of crunch pattern at the same time as well. So it's very good for working in particular the kind of posterior rotators. So you are going to feel it in particular on that glute of the lunging leg. So we have our sandbag shoulder to shoulder press. So imagine you've lifted the sandbag up onto onto one shoulder, like we did with that diagonal lift. Then you're going to be pressing it overhead and then down onto the opposite shoulder. So it's an overhead press or a vertical press upwards, but we're adding a little bit of kind of frontal plane stress to it by kind of moving it from one shoulder to the next. So we grip the sandbag with two hands in the middle and pressing it up and over the head, making sure you don't hit yourself in the face. Very good for working the lateral core as well as our press pattern muscles. And then last of the sandbag exercises, we have our split stance good morning. So good morning is a lift pattern movement. Weights, in this case the sandbag's on the back. We have a split stance, so all the weight on that lead leg. Rear foot is just used for balance. And then you're going to bend forward from the hips. So effectively you're doing like a single leg deadlift with the weight on the back, and the rear foot is just being used for a little bit of balance. So again, a lot of hamstring, glute, lower back being used for this particular movement pattern. So very good for correcting any bilateral strength differences between your hamstrings. And then the last piece of equipment we'll look at with this module is the Viper. So some of the movements we'll go through here, we'll have a look at swings, which is a lift pattern movement. We'll do a reverse crossover squat and lateral overhead reach, so a real combination movement. It's a squat pattern, but we're also getting some frontal plane movement as well. Lateral tilt and lunge, again, it's another squat pattern movement in the frontal plane. Lift curl press, which is a combination of lift and pressing. Rainbows, which is a supplementary movement, again, very frontal plane exercise. The lunge and overhead reach, which is a squat pattern movement. The reverse wood chop in a split kneeling, so this is an alternative to your standing rotation movements. Split kneel leg drive, which is a squat pattern, and then our squat push press, again another combination squat and press movement. So why do we use Vipers? Well, Viper drills are suitable for beginners and also for dynamic drills in order to help mobilize the body through different movement patterns and different planes of motion. We are limited on how heavy the Vipers go, so we tend to kind of increase the overload by increasing the velocity and also doing more kind of multi-planar movements rather than what we tend to do with barbells, which is just add more weight to the exercise. So here we see swings. So we go with a neutral grip. And again, it's very much a lift pattern, so all very hip dominant. And what we do is we kind of swing the Viper in between the legs. And then as we come up, we change the hand positioned over and then swing back in between the legs. So again, you want to limit the knee bend, and that way you'll feel it in the hamstrings, glutes, which is what the lift pattern is really there to work. So onto our reverse crossover squat with lateral sweep. So we use an offset grip for this one. And then what we're going to do is you do a little crossover squat. So you step back and across with one foot, and then at the same time you're doing this frontal plane sweep with the Viper. So very, very good for stimulating the abductors of the hip, so the abductors on the lateral side of the hip, as well as working the kind of lateral core muscles. It is a squat pattern movement, but it's very much a squat pattern movement in the frontal plane. And then we have another frontal plane squat movement, which is a lateral tilt and lunge. So we start with the Viper vertical, and then what you do is just tap it to the side so it falls laterally, and you do a lateral lunge. You catch it with the outside hand, flip it back up to the middle, and then repeat. So you go on either side. Try and get nice and deep with the lunge each time. So there's very little loading with this one, but we're using the Viper just as a bit of a toy, just to kind of keep someone's attention and to prompt them to kind of drop down nice and low for that lateral lunge. Lift, curl, press, combination movement. So we're going to take hold of the Viper with our standard neutral grip. We do our lift, curl it up to the shoulders, and then press all the way overhead to full extension. Bring it back down to the shoulders, lower back down towards the mid shin, and then repeat. So again, we want to focus on hip dominant for the lift part. It's like effectively a bicep curl, neutral bicep curl, hammer curl to the shoulders, and then a neutral grip press all the way above the head. So we're going to be working quads, glutes, hamstrings, biceps, triceps, deltoid. It's very much a whole body movement, this one. Then we have rainbows, which is effectively an overhead lateral flexion. We're doing it this time in a split kneeling position. So one knee on the ground, rear knee on the ground, and then the front leg bent. And effectively it's just pure lateral flexion. So we're holding the Viper overhead, and then we are pushing the hips laterally side to side as we move the Viper from side to side. So very good for gaining mobility in the frontal plane, working the lateral myofascial muscles, so the lateral core, the lateral hip muscles. It's a very good core exercise in order to stimulate the muscle spindles of that lateral core, the obliques. So we have the lunge and overhead reach. So we saw this with a medicine ball before. We're doing it now with a Viper, but we're doing it with an offset grip. So what we mean by this is the kind of Viper is more out to one side, and this adds a little bit more instability to the exercise. So as we lunge forward, we swing the Viper overhead, pretty much exactly the same as what we did with the medicine ball, but because it's now a little bit more unstable, we've got more weight off to one side, that just adds a little bit more frontal plane stress to what is more of a sagittal plane exercise. Obviously we're lunging forwards and backwards and reaching the Viper up in a sagittal plane, but because it's an offset loading, we'll add a little bit more frontal plane stress to the exercise. Next exercise is the Viper, reverse wood chop in a split kneeling position. So again, we're going with our offset grip, so we're holding it towards the bottom, split kneeling position. So again, we're trying to show you that, yeah, we do rotation, we can do it standing, but we want to do it in a split kneeling position, and that will just give us a little bit more of an altered core activation. And so what we're doing is we're swinging the Viper up and across the body diagonally, over that kind of shoulder, bringing it back down and repeating. So again, we want to do this at a reasonable velocity. It doesn't have to be as fast as possible, but the quicker we do it, the more stimulation of these muscle spindles for the lateral core, the muscles that you use to rotate the torso, the more muscle spindle activation we're going to get. So we do this all on one side for the duration of the set, and then swap legs and repeat going in the opposite direction. Next exercise we have here is our split kneel leg drive. So again, we could do this with a barbell, we could do it with a sandbag equally as well. We're showing it with the Viper in this case. Similar to a lunge, but we actually start on the ground with that rear knee actually on the ground. So with like a reverse lunge, we don't want that rear knee touching. We actually start in this split kneeling position. It's more vertical as well than a reverse lunge, so it's much more just up and down. So it's a squat movement pattern. You're really going to be working the quads and glutes of that lead leg as you're performing this movement. And then the last exercise we have, squat push press. Now we're showing you this one, again, same thing that we did with the medicine ball, but we're doing this in a vertical kind of squeeze grip. So what we do here is you squat down, and we're kind of just squeezing the Viper between our hands. So it's a little bit more kind of grip orientated. You can even kind of push the Viper up and gradually kind of grip it lower and lower with each repetition until you get to the bottom, and then you can kind of drop it back down and restart. So again, it's a combination movement, squatting and pressing upwards. We're just trying to teach you how to do that movement with a slightly altered position and a slightly different piece of equipment. So discussing some of the application, medicine balls, well, we can use these for slams, as long as they're not a bouncing medicine ball. Very good for throws, and we can do partner drills as well, where space and appropriate flooring will allow us to throw it onto the ground or throw it to other people. Or if you can have the space and the ability, you can do it outside as well. So a great piece of kit to be used outdoors. Also very good for triplanar or multiplanar drills for helping to improve activation of the neuromuscular system by stimulating the muscle spindles. Key thing with that is you need to be doing that at a reasonable velocity. If you do it slowly, it doesn't really help to get much muscle spindle activation. Sandbags, well, we would use lighter bags for more dynamic drills, and then use heavier sandbags for slower, more strength-orientated drills. Again, we can use them for slams because they don't bounce. We can throw them. We can use them with partners, again, where space and appropriate flooring allow. And just as with medicine balls, they're a great piece of kit to be used outdoors. Vipers, again, we would use the lighter weights for more dynamic drills, and again, we can use the heavier ones for slower, more strength-orientated, more stable exercises. Again, very good for triplanar or multiplanar drills for improving activation of the neuromuscular system, activating the muscle spindles, and just like we said a minute ago, you really, in order to kind of get the most out of that, you need to be doing those at a reasonable velocity.
So you should now complete the review questions for this module to ensure you've met the learning outcomes, and then you should complete the guided learning practice for this module, details of which are in the learner management system. Best way, practice the exercise yourself so you're happy with the techniques, and then you can practice coaching the exercises to a colleague. Once you've completed the review questions and the guided practice, you'll then move on to the next module.